Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you're all very welcome to this second session, and I think it builds very well onto the session that went before, and congratulations to all of the speakers in terms of, I suppose, we have seen the challenges and indeed the opportunities ahead, but ultimately we'll only harvest those opportunities, we'll only take on the challenges through having the right people in the right places armed with the right science, and I think this is where this session leads on quite nicely. I should say, ladies and gentlemen, the Climate Change Advisory Council, or the government, imposed a very strict target of a 25% reduction in agricultural emissions on the sector. The President has imposed an even stricter target on me in that he has reduced our session by 30 minutes. So I have a 30% reduction to deal with here and now. But we're up for the challenge in the same way as there's no doubt the agricultural sector is up for the challenge of the 25 minutes. So I'm not going to mess about with long introductions. If you want to see who these people are, read your bios in your panels. Just to introduce them, John Murray. John is Director of Markets with Board BIA. Dr. Siobhan, Kavanagh, Communications Manager in the SignPost Farms with the Teagasc programme. And Frank Monahan, Dean of the Faculty of Agriculture and Food Science at UCD. And Frank, I'll start with you in terms of, I suppose, my first question around the need for people and people with the capacity, whether it be in research, whether it be at farmer-facing level, whether it be at industry level or communications. How is UCD evolving the agricultural course and the wider range of agricultural courses to adjust to the climate that we're facing and the demand that we're going to face?
Yes, so thanks, Justin. So I mean, we, like all the agriculture providers in Ireland, recognise the need for graduates that are equipped with the right skills to meet the challenges that we have ahead. In terms of the curriculum, as is one of the good things about university curriculum is that it can evolve very quickly. It's not like a Leaving Cert curriculum which is prescribed. And so, you know, we have that advantage in that we can incorporate the latest knowledge from our research active staff into our programs. So in terms of the climate targets you mentioned, that features very much across all our degree programs, and we've 13 of them at the moment on undergraduate programs. So sustainability in all its aspects, and that, you know, meeting the climate target, that will be embedded in the program. So in that sense, you know, we're very conscious that our graduates going out have the skills they need. So be that in animal and crop production, right through to our environmental science program. But even, I think, as John Roach mentioned, you know, the dietary sustainability, the sustainability of the diet for humans. So we have a degree in human nutrition and health and food science. So,
and how do you see demand for those courses, Frank?
Yeah, so it's our CAO applications this year are up, and so there is a great demand. Over 95% of our graduates are in employment within 6 months of graduating. So that's a very positive story for us and for all, you know, students thinking about agriculture. So the demand is there. We have to meet it.
Do you have, or are you seeing any trends, Frank? And I know a lot of time it's the mammies have a big influence over the direction of travel after secondary school and going into third level education. And our industry hasn't really been painted in the most positive of lights in recent years, and certainly in recent months. And we're talking about reduction schemes, we're talking about getting rid of cows, we're talking about land for nature, we're talking everything, I suppose, in the broader narrative around our sector is negative. And it's even nearly moving away from the need for science and professionals. And I know when we talk to Siobhan, it'll be a very different picture she will present. But have you a concern that young people may be staying away from our sector because of, I suppose, the narrative that John maybe talked about and Frank talked about earlier on?
Yeah, so hopefully the narrative is changing to be a bit more positive now that we have a target, and that presents with us lots of challenges, and we need to communicate those challenges and the opportunities they offer. With regard to the mammies of Ireland, what we find is it's actually peers who influence the second level students in their choice.
Must have just been my mummy, Frank. I'm unique in that.
But you know, so and in that sense, our graduates are our greatest ambassadors. Yeah. And many of them are here on stage, and we try as much as possible to get them in to meet with our current students. But of course, you're also talking about Leaving Cert students through our promotional activities to you know, potential students of ours, you know, if you see it, you realize you can be it. So to to put up those people who are champions out there, who have successful careers in agriculture. And we find that's the best way, to attract students in. They can see somebody who's successful in careers in agriculture. And, we work with AgriAware, with ASA, with all of the other, bodies that are supportive of agriculture in Ireland. We feel those connections are very important, and they support us. Yeah.
Siobhan, Frank talks about the need for communications and getting that positive message out there. I suppose you play, in your role, a double strand in that, in terms of, one, SignPost is about getting the message, and then you particular in terms of communicating it and getting it out there. Like, if I was to say to you, maybe do the elevator pitch for SignPost for me first, for the audience. What is SignPost? What are your KPIs, and what do you hope to achieve?
Okay. So the SignPost programme led by Teagasc is an amalgamation or coming together of all the partners in the industry, processors, farmers, media, state bodies, farm organisations, with the primary objective of improving the sustainability of Irish farms, in particular reducing our greenhouse gases emissions in line with the national plan. And there's three main elements to the programme. The first element is the SignPost farmers. So we have 120 demonstration farmers, and that's building on existing joint programmes that have been built up over multiple years. That's the first pillar of it. They're the early adopters, and we'll come back and talk about that maybe later on. The second pillar is the advisory programme. So we know we will make good progress with our SignPost farmers because they're getting a very intensive advisory service. But we also need to make progress with all 130,000 farmers over the next 7 or 8 years. So that's the important component of it, is actually bringing it out to a much wider audience. And then the third piece is the research piece, which Frank mentioned, which is the NASCO, and looking at soil carbon and trying to measure that on our SignPost farms. By the end of the year, there'll be 30 of those flux towers in place. I think it's the highest density of flux towers in the world, so that's going to give us a lot of information around that piece. So in terms of the KPIs, and you've asked me this before about what do we see as success for the programme, the ultimate success of the programme will be the inventory. So is the inventory going to show a reduction in emissions? And I suppose from a public perception point of view, ultimately, if we don't have that proof point, we can talk about individual farms doing particularly well, or our SignPost farms, but unless the inventory has seen a reduction, we haven't achieved what we set out to achieve.
So Siobhan, how are you going to take it from those 120 farms? It's great to be able to show real progress in 120 farms, but as you say, there's 130,000 farms out there that we need to adopt these technologies that Frank talked about earlier on. And while we're seeing great progress, still at a low level, was it 6% clover adoption, 16 OK on dairy farms and whatnot. How important is, I suppose, we've got a common agriculture policy, we've got Pillar 2, we've seen knowledge transfer elements in Pillar 2 before, but they've been quite rigid. I just got the sense that a lot of farmers were going there to tick a box and get their money and move on. We can't afford that this time. This knowledge transfer, whatever knowledge transfer is in Pillar 2, we're going to be measured on how well it can deliver it very publicly. Yeah, absolutely. And you're right, we have 120 SignPost farms that we know will adopt these technologies and will meet the targets. It's to get that out to a wider audience. So our own advisory service is very active in this space. All of our advisors have been trained up in the area. So they might be going out to talk about grassland management, but there's always a reference back to sustainability. That's with our own advisors, but our own advisors' capacity to deliver a dedicated service to that is limited because they're being diluted with other things that have to be done as part of the service to clients. So there needs to be additional resources, I think, put in to deliver that service. It is a contact sport. Engagement with farmers is a contact sport. The communications is the easy part of my job. The difficult part for all our jobs is to engage farmers, and that requires contact. So just in reference to the KT, or the money coming from training and development from CAP, I think whatever kind of a programme is there needs to have flexibility built into it. They've worked well in the past, they've engaged farmers, we know discussion groups work, but you need we need the flexibility to maybe bring larger numbers of farmers through for shorter periods of time. So maybe possibly workshops,
where you bring in farmers and do the training piece with them, help them on a one-to-one then to develop a plan for their own farm, because this is going to come down to a farm by farm, developing that plan. I think there's a bit of confusion there amongst farmers at the moment. I suppose in the run-up to the 25% being decided on, and immediately afterwards, there's no plan. We don't have a plan how we're going to achieve this. And you mentioned it yourself in the editorial that farmers are inclined to be sitting on their hands because there is no plan.
There's a huge hunger in Johnstown, Siobhan. I took a lot of positivity away from Johnstown, actually, when I seen the level of engagement, the level of questioning, and farmers hungry. But then when you talk to them one-to-one, they say, well, I don't want to do that yet, because if the credits are going to come down the line, and yet we have a very tight time frame of 7 years, and there's a hunger. You would be encouraged by the level of hunger that we saw down in Johnstown, the quality of the information being presented.
Yeah.
But what would frustrate you is the fact that there's a reticence among farmers to implement it because they don't know what it will mean for them into the future.
And I think that's why you need dedicated resources to sit down with farmers and identify what is the plan. We have the technologies, and I think as an industry, we all have a responsibility to show leadership now and say there is a plan. We don't have the full details of the 25% and where it's going to come from, but we do know where we're going to get at least a third of the way, or 40% of the way. But you need resources to do that. So the KT money that will come from Pillar 2 needs to allow for discussion groups to take a different approach. I think the one-to-one is so important. And that
very
is
expensive, Siobhan.
It's expensive, but I think you start off with, it has worked well for Aspen, I'll come back to that in a minute, but if you start off with some training and workshops, you do to your one-to-one and then you provide follow-up. Pat has told me that in the ASTA programme, the engagement level is at 94%. So you have to get to that level to get that kind of engagement, to help farmers to develop the plan, because there is a plan there. It's just to sit down and identify what are the 3 or 4 easy wins that I can focus in on. And then obviously there's a responsibility on the industry and everybody that deals with farmers to support that.
And there is an element, Siobhan, as well, as the KPMG analysis showed that we did, is that there's a win for farmers here too, that there's an economic benefit. It's not all negative.
Yeah, like we're very fortunate in that the suite of technologies that are there right now for this first stage 1, they're mostly win-wins. They're all win-wins except maybe for investment in LESS equipment. Yeah. And that makes it an awful lot easier. And some of the research that's been coming out from UCG in particular, looking at what do farmers need to hear about to be encouraged to take these technologies, and it's finance. So we may not have those advantages with the technologies that are coming down the line, but certainly with the technologies that are there now, it is a win-win. So it does make it a bit easier for us to sell those technologies to farmers and identify the easier options for them to reduce emissions.
John, obviously Frank talks about communication, Siobhan talks about communication through the lens of the farmer, the message out to farmers. Bord Bia and you are very much focused on the communication. I always think, and we've talked about this before, the customer and the consumer, and the difference in that. But what is the message? Actually, rewind that. How strong a message have we to go to the customer or consumer? And maybe just explain the difference in Bord Bia's view of the difference between that customer and consumer as well.
Yeah, so look, it is a good question in terms of there is a difference between the consumer and the customer, and we spent a lot of time, I suppose, particularly over the last 2 years, to really understand that dynamic. And we did a major piece of research last year with over 11,000 consumers across 13 different markets to really try and understand what is resonating with a consumer, but also what is resonating with those buyers who are representing those brands. And consumers have come on phenomenally over the last 5-10 years in terms of their knowledge and their understanding of sustainability. Carbon is not a foreign word anymore to a consumer. Is it impacting their choices? Not quite yet, but it will come. But is it impacting the choices and the decisions of customers? Yes, it is, because they're thinking about their brands.
Tell us what you mean by customer now.
So when I think about a customer, I think about the retailers that we're targeting across all of Europe and across the rest of the world, all of those high-end customers that we want to work with in the future. They're thinking about their brand equity. They're thinking about the commitments that they have to make publicly to their shareholders and to their own consumers. Mm-hmm. And they're trying to stay that 5 years ahead of the consumer, and they're putting targets in place now. So when they're asking for detailed data on what are we actually doing and achieving, that is so that they can be very robust in their communications back to their end consumers at the end, who are not quite there yet. They're still thinking about natural food. Yeah. They're thinking about quality standards. They're still thinking about welfare is up there with them as well. And packaging. Packaging is
There's a very interesting point, John. For fear we forget to come back to it. It's not all about emissions. No. It's not just all about climate change. Welfare, the science around welfare, the water quality, all of these other elements, even labour in some countries and labour sustainability, labour treatment of labour. There's a much bigger narrative going than just about emissions as well.
Yeah, and it's really important that we take that holistic view and that holistic approach to what we're trying to achieve, and that's very much what Origin Green, as we've been working on for the last 10 years, has been trying to do. Emissions is central. It's probably the one that's gone further in terms of it's easier to grasp, and we know the consumers will register with that further. But if you go to pockets of the market like Germany and like the Netherlands at the moment, welfare is certainly going to be the challenge of the next 3 to 5 years.
The other element of that, John, our industry has not only been painted as being bad for the environment, some have latched onto it, and I always think that they're underlying this environmental narrative. They're really, if you scratch the surface, it's an anti-animal agricultural narrative that's, in a lot of cases, is maybe masquerading as an environmental narrative. In some quarters, not all. And we've seen an Eat Lancet report, we've seen the global burden of disease basically elevate the consumption of red meat and really cascading the red meat as a nutritious, nutrient-dense product. And how much, to what extent is that on your radar and Board B's radar as well?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's acutely on our radar. I mean, and it's inbuilt in our strategy for the next 3 and 10 years. We need to be thinking about sustainable nutrition. We need to move on from just having calculations that are based on ecological impact. We need to be thinking about the density that a product actually delivers or nutritionally delivers for a consumer. So, there is an absolute right to be present for all of the products that we produce, because they are actually contributing more to what individual humans require than necessarily moving down a plant-based diet. And the consumption that you would need to intake of certain plant-based diets in order to meet that nutritional requirement is astronomical, and the calorie impact that would have in terms of obesity is also very, very challenging. So it is early stage is the one thing I would say. There's not a lot of good work yet done around standardizing what a sustainable nutrition LCA would look like, but it's coming, and there is some interesting stuff there around the nutrient food score index, and we need to be thinking about how do we bring that to the consumer rather than. I
suppose what I'm saying here, John, from you is tooling ourselves up with the science just doesn't stop at climate. It actually now expands into defending the nutritional aspects of our products to a consumer base as well.
Absolutely. Look, we will need to have reports and ecological LCAs, and we'll need to have that to show progress against our overarching goals. But to a consumer, we need to be talking to them about, on your plate, balance. What are you actually consuming, and how is that delivering for you?
Frank, John talks about a 5-year treadmill for the consumer or for the customer to get to the consumer. It's a 5-year treadmill, of not longer, a 7-year treadmill for you guys as well. And this is a very different conversation. If I was a young person coming into this conference today thinking, this industry's negative headlines, blah, 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 but yet I'm hearing here there is huge opportunity for young graduates to come into agriculture, and not actually just young graduates from farming backgrounds. It's about food nutrition, environmental science, animal welfare. There is a huge opportunity in this industry to provide a very diverse range of job and career opportunities for young people. And I suppose, put that back onto UCD. How are you guys dealing with that? Or what's your plan over the next 5 years to make sure, because ultimately this is the people's business, to make sure that we have the people with the caliber and the training to be able to talk about what John and Siobhan has at farm level, at consumer level, to deliver?
Yeah, and just following up, on that from John's point, that sustainable nutrition, sustainable diet, I think we need to, get the message across that that's a part of agriculture. And going back to, again, what John Roach said, we eat 3 times a day. And I think sometimes, the negativity that's associated with production, agriculture, ruminant production, doesn't take into account the fact that we need to have a balanced and sustainable diet. And a balanced diet can have meat and dairy, and indeed many people would say it needs to get the balance of amino acids that you need. And in fact, the quantities of meat are not, a portion of meat is half the size of the palm of your hand, so it's not huge, but it means that it's an option for lots of people. It's not a huge amount. And I think, in terms of selling the opportunities in agriculture, we need to get the message out to parents, but also to those prospective students, that it's not just about the production side, it's going through the whole food chain to the sustainable diet. And even just going back to the plant-based thing, sometimes I think there's a halo effect around it. When you look at the ingredients in some of the plant-based meats, for example, they're highly complex and maybe of low value protein and high fat. And I think our job in the graduates that we produce is being able to get that message across to consumers, and to go into the food companies, to Board Bia, to all of the other agencies that need that expertise in from our students in getting that. And
are you engaging with the likes of the Board Bias, the Teagascs, and the wider industry? What type of graduates do you need, and what skill sets? And do you come back then and adjust the curriculum, the courses to actually suit that?
Yes, we do. I mean, we just recently met with Board Bia, met with some of the companies who are employing our graduates. They tell us what they need. They tell us what's good about them, but also areas that we can improve in. So that feeds back into the programs, and work experience and internship is a very important part of that. So employers get a sense of our graduates.
Frank, one of the I suppose it's not a bottleneck, but maybe to ask you the question if it is a bottleneck. You guys taking up 350 graduates. I'm hearing Teagasc are going to need more. I'm hearing the industry is going to be looking more. I see it on LinkedIn all the time, how our meat industry, our dairy industry are putting their own teams in place, obviously to meet that demand. Our retailers are putting their own teams in place of graduates. Has UCD the capacity to spin that up in terms of if we need 700 graduates coming out of UCD or 1,000 graduates coming out of UCD in this industry in the coming years?
Yeah, I mean, we have a whole range of programs. We get low numbers into some of them, horticulture, forestry, and we need to get more.
And yet one of our biggest ambitions is around forestry.
Exactly. And so we need to, let parents, students see, look, that there are opportunities there in agriculture, in areas like that, and we can, the numbers can increase and need to service that need. And
maybe on that point, I think it's a good point. But the point that was made earlier by Frank, it's really critical that we're showing up the best we can show up to entice these undergraduates that are thinking about where they're going to study and what they're going to do, and we show where they can go and where they can land, because more and more we're seeing the investment banks having people in this area. We're seeing all of the high-end retailers, which are good jobs, and they're there's great opportunities and careers in that. And maybe we're not painting that picture strong enough that actually every agri grad has an opportunity.
And the diversity of that, John, as well, because at the end of the day, if we look and people talk about climate being one of the limiting factors in dairy production and our agriculture, labour is probably going to be a bigger limiting impact. I see farmers, when I talk to farmers, it's about getting labour and getting good quality labour and whatnot. And at the end of the day, running some of the farms that are out there today, it's somebody that needs to be skilled in business management, HR management. They need to be at a level the same stage as they're going into John's retail jobs, Frank. It's getting that breadth from the guys that know about milking the cows to know about marketing the product. Are we, as my panel, and feel free, Siobhan, if you want to come in this, are confident that we have the education system in place to actually respond to that spectrum?
Well, I might come in. It needs to always evolve, and that's to meet the need. And I suppose that's, as going back to the point, that's one of the things about the curriculum. It can change. What we find, the feedback we get from our graduates is that the agriculture degree is a very good basic degree. They have a sort of an innate, I suppose, understanding that allows them to go into multiple sectors.
Well, that was one of my questions, Frank, and sorry to cut across you, but when you chart the direction of travel, how many of your agricultural degree students are going into agriculture or going into a broader spectrum industry, or actually taken out into other industries? Because it is a very broad degree.
Yeah, I would say the majority, I think, go back into agriculture, food-related jobs for sure. You know, across all the food companies, we have regulation, and some go back farming, but some are, you know, drawn out of that, and there's a lot of competition. That's what we hear from some of the employers, and that means that we have to really work to get the best graduates.
Siobhan, just and maybe to ramp things up a little bit, like I hear a lot of frustration among farmers about their emissions, and what they'll say to me is, "Yeah, that's my gross emissions." But if Michael O'Leary was able to put a skin in an airplane that actually absorbed emissions, do you think he would let the government talk in gross emissions and not net? And what I make that reference to is in the sequestration of carbon in soils. Maybe if I could, like, maybe it's symptomatic as, have we not ramped up the research and the capacity of the people coming through our industry to get on top of this? Now, you're saying and it's great to hear that we've the densest population of carbon flux towers in anywhere in the world, and that's great. But we're coming to the curve, and it is frustrating farmers. Like, where do you see us being in 5 years' time? We see what's happening in Northern Ireland with the MRV and getting the measurement right. Are you confident that we will be in a position in 5 years' time to talk about net emissions of farms rather than gross? And of course, we have to reflect that some soils may be emitting carbon as well, as Frank talked about.
Yeah, and it's accepted it is very frustrating for farmers. They're being accounted for their emissions, but not for what's being sequestered. Just on the research piece, like the research on carbon emissions or sequestration actually has been going on in Johnstone Castle for the last 20 years. So they've had flux towers down there for that length of time. And I suppose with the resources that they got recently, they were able to ramp that up considerably. We do expect, with the amount of data that's going to be gathered from these 30 flux, that we will have real data that we'll switch to a tier 3, which will be modelled. So we will have that data in 5 years' time. Like at the moment, those flux towers are measuring, 10 measures every second, 24/7. So there is a lot of data across a range of soil types, management practices. There's a huge body of information that will be there. And yes, we will have that information in 5 years' time. It is frustrating for farmers, but until we have that baseline data, there's very little we can do. Now, sequestration is included in the inventory at a very basic level, but we do expect to have that information. And I think whatever kind of decision support tool we build for farmers, and Teagasc is working on that at the moment, it needs to be able to include both, that farmers can go in and look at their own metrics in terms of their emissions, but also what they're sequestering if they put in details on their farm, that they can from that then do their scenario analysis for different actions that they take on the farm, whether it be around reducing their emissions or sequestering, and then ultimately come up with a plan. But I would be confident, and from our researchers in Teagasc, that will be available in 5 years' time. You could argue it should have been done earlier, but Frank made this point earlier on. The work has been going on, and if you look at all of the tools that are there right now for farmers, a lot of that research has been going on for the past 20 years, so it's not like we're coming late to the game. And I think the sequestering, people mightn't like me saying this, but the whole issue of carbon sequestration, I think that discussion will continue for the next couple of years, but I think we need to focus on the here and now and the technologies that we can adopt. I think sometimes talking about, and I know we have to talk about it, but it depends on what level it's being talked about, but talking about GWP star or carbon sequestration or any of those other things that are still in flux at the moment can be distracting for farmers.
More of a policy level, that discussion.
Yeah, it's more a policy level,
than...
but farmers are hearing a lot of this, and I think it is distracting them from the here and now and what they can do now in terms of moving the thing on. And I think that's where the industry, we all have a responsibility to get back to that point of what's the here and now going to deliver.
John, that frustration extends into Bord Bia and SignPost in that obviously farmers are getting their carbon footprint and their carbon emissions, and they say, well, I have forestry in my land, I have hedgerows in my land, my soils are sequestering carbon. And again, the SignPost, it talks about a gross emissions figure. Like, is that going to move? Where the Bord Bia see that taken? Because ultimately, what I'm hearing from you today is that the demand for this is only going to increase. We need to be scientifically robust in Origin Green. That we nearly need to double down on it and copper fast in it. But do you see where the frustration is with farmers, that they see that only half their story has been told in some of the narrative that they're receiving back from Board BA?
Yeah, look, I mean, absolutely. Again, I totally see that, and it is an evolution, I suppose. I would say, 10 years ago we started Origin Green, and even over those 10 years, it has been a significant learning curve for us in terms of putting that together. But now there's 55,000 farmers across the country who are getting a report, and arguably, maybe not all of them are looking at that report, but there's a lot of very solid information in there around how they're performing year on year and how they're performing against their peers. And that's a really strong starting point, even before we get to all of the tools and all of the resources that are needed to do that. And I really appreciate the resource challenge, because, getting resources to do audits on 55,000 farms is hard, on it. But we need to also put a bit of onus back on the farmers to say, there's tools there that you can pick up today and you can start to work with.
I can't let that go unchallenged, because you know what I'm going to come out with now.
I do.
And it's my hobby horse. There is a tool out there that farmers can do. The good work of Teagasc has shown that it can reduce emissions by 32%. I was struck by Frank O'Mara's comments earlier, where he said the consumer wants low carbon products. And yet we have a technology that will drive efficiencies and that could be implemented, not in all farms, but in a lot of farms tomorrow morning, is bull beef systems. Will reduce the environmental footprint of our beef, shown by Teagasc, by 32%. And yet the consumer doesn't want it, farmers are being told.
Yeah, and look, that unfortunately is a bit of a reality, Justin. Like, we totally acknowledge that there is that benefit there in terms of carbon footprint. But over the last 10 years, and with the build-up of key customers that we have been targeting to really try and build a sustainable future for ourselves, the feedback from them is that they want prime steer and prime heifer product, and it has been performing well as well. When we look at the price that's being paid for those animals versus young bull average prices across Europe, they have been at or above those prices over that.
I'm conscious, guys, we've only 15 minutes left, or maybe a bit less, and I want to go to the floor, and I want to be maybe targeted. So if you want to see if everybody else in the room asks questions, because there's no questions, I'm going to start asking them to people on the floor, and I'm going to start with where's Niall Brown now? I saw him there earlier. Stick your hand up there, Niall, because I want to bring you in this bull beef debate, because it's very easy for me to sit here and be glib about it and whatnot, but you have to sell the product at the end of the day too, and respond to the customer needs. So maybe on that, on what John, on the bull beef technology and the conundrum.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Yeah, well, I'd say in fairness, John hit the nail on the head there. I mean, I suppose from your point of view as an agri-journalist, you look at things through the lens of the farmer. Whereas in Dawn Meats, we need to look at it through a broader lens. I mean, we've got the farmer, but we also have the market. And I've just finished travelling around Europe, visiting our sales offices, and the message is clear. The reason why we're exporting 90% of our beef from this country and getting onto prime position on the shelves of Europe is because of taste and tenderness. I mean, our own consumers here in Ireland, we don't eat bull beef here in Ireland, and there's a reason for that. We can do a blind taste test here this afternoon, and we can have people comparing bull beef to steer and heifer beef. They're all going to go for the steer and heifer beef. So that's been our unique selling point in Europe, and that's how we've got onto all those markets and onto all those shelves. And I mean, that's what we've focused on since we've been really focused on Europe over the last 20 years. We're competing with a different, better product. And that's what the customers are responding to, and that's what's creating repeat purchase. I know some of our competitors here in Ireland, they're doing niche markets with their young bull beef, and that's something also that's important, and I'm sure they're working directly with their farmer suppliers, and that's what they're focused on. But we focus on steer and heifer beef, pasture grass based, and that's what's working very well for us. So I mean, I know it comes up every now and then, but that's the simple answer to it.
No, and I appreciate that, and I must say it is great to see people at the senior level in the industry attending events like this and hearing the challenges at the farm level. Guys, I will start asking more of you questions from the floor. If you don't put your hands up, I want this to be interactive in the discussion. So has any other questions, comments here at the front? I don't want any more questions on bulls. I don't want to turn it into a load of bull. Maybe it already is that, but if...
Yeah, thank you. Tom Rafter, I'm a private consultant and member of ACA. I think a common theme for both panels is the emergence of new sciences and technologies that need to be adopted at farm level. And I suppose we're all a little bit wondering how are all these technologies going to be adopted. And I think the elephant in the room to some extent is our extension services. We have configured an extension service which has been very efficient at getting messages out to farmers about food production. But we need to reorientate our extension services. I think it was a figure mentioned there of 130,000 farmers in the country. I think our state service, Teagasc service, is about 45,000. So I'd like to get an opinion from the panel, I suppose, as to how do we get messages out to farmers? How do we reconfigure our advisory services? What do we do different to get a better reach to farmers? I suppose to involve more of the agricultural scientists that are on the ground, that are privately employed. And I'd particularly like to hear from maybe UCD and from Siobhan as to how we might do that. And I know Siobhan said that we need to have individual plans for farmers. We need to have one-to-one reach. So I'd like to get some views from the panel as to how we go about doing that.
Okay, if there's another question, I'm going to take it, guys, because I'm conscious of my time reduction target. So if there's not, Amy, sorry, you have one there. Amy, I'll come to you next.
Thanks, Justin. Tom O'Dwyer, SignPost programme. Maybe linked to Tom's question, could the panel also comment on future knowledge transfer initiatives under the new CAP, and perhaps whether the department in forming such schemes should think in terms of knowledge exchange rather than knowledge transfer. Knowledge transfer seems to suggest that the professional is at the top of the room or at the head of the group in the field and is pushing out the information, whereas I think we really need to work on getting farmers involved in and supporting them to come up with solutions that work on their own farms. So maybe just a comment on that as well.
Amy, I might just take those two questions now and I'll hold you. Siobhan, I always hate when my colleagues put up their hand to ask a question because you always know it's going to be a tricky one. Knowledge exchange versus knowledge transfer. I think it's a very good point Tom makes, that you're not coming here to lecture people. It's about exchanging information.
Yeah, and I think if you're lecturing people, it's communicating a message rather than engaging people. And we know communications is the easy part of this. It's actually getting that one-to-one. All of our experience would say discussion groups is where you get exchanging of ideas. That's where all the research is saying that's where you get technology adoption. So the discussion groups is that knowledge exchange trees. But so that's why within the CAP, the next CAP, I think that flexibility to have discussion groups to allow for those exchanges to happen, I think is absolutely critical. To come back to Tom's question on how are we going to reach the much wider audience than just the farmers that are in discussion groups? And yes, we have 130,000 farmers, and they all have a role to play, no matter how small it is. I think the people here in this audience have a huge role to play in that. In anybody that has contact with farmers or dealing with farmers has a role to play in that conversation. And it's the one-to-one conversations that we have with farmers or in groups. That's where farmers start to pick up ideas. And if we just go back to the very basics of how farmers actually learn. One, we give them information, but that's not going to lead to a change in how they react or how they adopt a technology. The second piece is the persuasion. And at that stage, yes, information can help that to persuade them that a technology is a good idea. We take the protected urea one. So you might send out a video from the co-op to say, Shane Fitzgerald, I think he's in the audience, is using protected urea. You might persuade a farmer that it's a good idea. But the next stage of that is the farmer actually making the decision to actually use that technology. And I think that's very often where we fall down. We maybe do stage 1 and 2 well, but stage 3 we fall down. So the farmer's decided protected urea is a good idea, I should be using it. But he rings up to order his fertiliser. He's been offered can at 850, protected urea at €1,000, and he looks at that and he goes, right, I'll go with the can. So I think anybody that's dealing with farmers
across the supply chain.
Across the supply chain. And the start of that is, and I ask everybody in the audience, are people comfortable talking about the technologies and talking about climate change? And I think the thing has moved on a good bit, but I'm not so sure that we've brought everybody with us in terms of understanding it. So I think the starting point for an awful lot of people is training and understanding the basics. Being aware then of the tools that are available to us, like the farmer feedback report, our own tools around decision supports and what's coming down the line. But I think that training piece is the first one. And at the moment, we're doing a good deal of training with co-ops that are bringing in the people that are one-to-one contact with farmers, so that they are aware, yes, protected urea is €1,000, but it's still cheaper than can. Yeah. So I think everybody in the industry has a role to play. Anybody that has contact with farmers should be having the conversation with them around this. I know if somebody that's selling feed and fertiliser is going out with another objective to sell feed or fertiliser, but that can be built into the conversation around it, around what type of fertiliser you're going to use that's going to be cheaper, but also deliver for the environment. So I think that training piece for everybody in the sector, I think, is really important. How's that going to be delivered? I know with our SignPost farmers, our SignPost partners, we're very active in that space at the moment. It does need to be ramped up because there's still a lot of people to be trained. But I think the Connected programme, I'm looking at Mark Gibson down there, the Connected programme, there are programmes that can deliver that. And I think it's the starting point. I think we all have a role to play to engage farmers. And it's about that one-to-one conversation.
Frank, the role in terms of not just engaging farmers, but engaging and educating the wider advisory body outside of Teagasc, obviously, as well, in terms of the role of UCD in that.
Yeah, so I just comment on our the graduate offerings we have. So we have our undergraduate programs, obviously, and many of our students go out into the workplace, but then come back to take graduate opportunities. So we have a master's in agricultural innovation support and in agricultural innovation and entrepreneurship. And in both of those, the knowledge transfer, knowledge exchange is a major part of them. They're supported by Teagasc fellows. Some of the students are supported in that way, and via the MOCRA SkillNet program. And they're really useful programs with applications like, in roles like you have, Siobhan. We need to grow those. We have a knowledge transfer, perhaps it should be a knowledge exchange conference every year in conjunction with Teagasc, where those students showcase what they've learned, what their experiences have been. But looking towards the opportunities that there are for in research, but also in that knowledge exchange, we need to grow those programs.
Amy, the red mic, guys.
Yeah, I'll make it really quick. I think we're nearly out of time. Just, I suppose, going back to the point that was made, John, at the start about the consumer lagging behind the customer. How does the farmer, or how does Board B hope to support the farmer? I suppose to Niall's point as well about the perception of bull beef and the sustainability credentials of the steers or the heifers. So what's Board B going to do to support, I suppose, that economic disconnect between the 5 years, between the customer, where the consumer is and where the customer is, on supporting sustainable food production in Ireland?
I'll take one more question, guys, if I have it, and then I'll wrap it up. One more question. Move quickly if you have. Philip, have you identified? Sorry, I can't see. Oh, Odile, yeah. This is a bit like getting the boy band back together again, Odile.
Hi, thank you. So my question's for John, really. Anecdotal evidence would suggest on the ground that there's going to be a fairly dramatic swing into the new organic farming scheme when it opens later this year. And I'm wondering, we already have leakage from the system, how well Board B is situated to sell that beef as organic, or is there even a market for it? What's the consumer trend telling you now?
John, do you want to take those, or you pressure now?
To be fair, well, look, maybe first on the support piece from Amy's point of view. Look, ultimately, our goal is in our strategy is to make sure that we are positioned with the best possible returning customers in the marketplace, and that is by offering those customers who are setting very high standards and leading standards in terms of what they want to source. We can't influence price directly ourselves, and I think everybody knows that, but we can create the proof points, and it is about the proof points that enables us to win at those points or at those particular positions. And those proof points are embedded in everything that we've been trying to do with our SDAS and with our SBLAS schemes over the years, but also in terms of actually becoming much more transparent with those individual customers. So more and more, we're being asked to provide the data to back it up. And we're probably one of the only countries in the world who can do it really well in terms of backing up that data. And that in itself is significant in terms of locking in and building long-term sustainable business partnerships with them. And we're moving, I absolutely say this, we're moving into partnership level now with these customers. And that is the key to long-term return.
John, just again, maybe it's a little bit of a hobby horse, might go back to our Teagasc organic, but taking it to the next level about traceability and about genetics and moving on the technology, you talk about being unique. We're also unique in terms of ICBF and our national database. We've written about this extensively in the journal, moving towards a national DNA database where we have full traceability. We have built embraces. We can fast-track genetic improvement. We can bring a product offering, because there's no point in us coming along and saying we're different from Brazil because we put 2 yellow tags in an animal's ear anymore, because they do it too. They've all moved on. But we have a unique offering here in terms of the database and the technology we have. Is that something this industry should be considering from a marketing point of view as well as a climate point of view?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's absolute advantages to that, because, you know, the science is unarguable, and that's what we need to get back to, is the proof points in science. And if we can demonstrate to our customers that we are on the right genetic journey and that we have the ability to really back that up and prove it, that's also valuable to them in terms of long-term decisions. I mean, you know, last year when we went out and did this piece of research with our client or with our customers, 51% of them said that, you know, sourcing and sustainability sourcing was integral to their business. Okay, and we talked about the number of people that are putting, you know, agri teams in place to support their buying teams on it. But more than that, we saw a huge number of them talk about the fact that they were integrating backwards into their supply chains. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to buy out, but it does mean that they're going to build that partnership even further. And I think, you know, anything that we do from a genetic point of view that shows us up as being forward and leading in that space, and that we can actually influence faster, is definitely got to be worth something.
I'm sorry, because Odil's question was a bit muffled in my sound, so it was on organics. It was on organics.
On organics and the market for organic. Look, I mean, absolutely, you know, we think that there's a market for organic out there. We've recently been to Germany. We've been doing a number of market studies, both in the Nordics, both in Germany. We'll be doing something in France later, or early next year. And we do see a very solid market out there. And I think absolutely there's potential for us to return a good return on that. But I would make the point that organic in itself is probably not enough. It needs to be organic with a very, very solid sustainability proof point underneath it.
Guys, I'm going to finish with one question. We've heard about the need and more roles and all that, but who's going to pay for all of this? Anybody want to put their hand up? Where's the money going to come from? Who's going to pay? Is it all going to come back down inside the farm gate, and the farmer, the position inside the farm gate that margin is at its tightest? Like, is the consumer willing to pay more, John? Maybe if I be direct in terms of for this product, or is this just going to be a prerequisite to being on the retail shelf, as Niall talks about?
No, I don't think it's a prerequisite. I think it's a prerequisite to being on the best returning shelves. And I think that's an important distinction, that it's not about us going after commodity product. It's about us trying to get out of that commodity product that John talked about earlier on, and really trying to position ourselves higher up there. Are we going to get everything onto that? No, but are we going to get a portion of it that's hopefully going to lift the overall boat? That's where we've got to be focused on.
I suppose it comes down to everybody wants sustainability, but there's not a lot of people putting their hand up to pay for it in terms of food prices, and we see the sensitivity there is towards food prices at the minute.
Which is why we need to have, you know, economically viable tools and programs. We can't be putting out things that are going to drive significant cost. We have to have everything costed out. We need to be able to demonstrate that, you know, it can be done efficiently.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to bring, unless there's any burning questions, I'm going to bring this session to a close a few minutes later than we have, but given I think my panel did well, and thank you very much, Frank, Siobhan, and John, for making your answers so succinct, and I think we covered a lot of ground in over the course of the hour. I suppose, ladies and gentlemen, if I could sum up what I'm hearing is the 2 C's. Communication and collaboration is key. That communication to our customers and or to our consumers, and that collaboration, John, with our customers that you talked about, partnership. And Siobhan, that communication, and it's more than just talking to farmers, it's about being part of their farm business and actually collaborating with them. And I think the comment there around knowledge exchange rather than knowledge transfer is a very good one, and those subtleties can make a difference. And Frank, for your business, it's about that communication and collaboration with the stakeholders and really getting into making sure that we have the quality of graduates coming through, but it's also communicating back down the line and selling this industry, guys, to young people as a fantastic industry to come into, because if we don't have a future. It's the lifeblood of this industry, has been able to compete in that talent war that's out there. And also I think, and maybe sometimes we fall down in this, but there's a huge need for collaboration and communication across state agencies in the design of schemes to make sure it's just not fully governed by Brussels, and I accept we have to operate within the confines of schemes in Brussels, but we have to look at how we can make them manageable and deliver across. Siobhan, as you talk about the knowledge transfer, the KT side of it, that they're not regimental just to tick a box to say we're compliant, that they actually deliver something and have an impact. And I think, guys, I hope you take from this session is that if we can do that, and I think it's great to hear the appetite here that there is to do that, if we can do that, we can take on this challenge and we can provide fantastic career paths for new graduates and new people coming into our industry. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed the session. Thanks very much for your time.